ETC is headquartered in Canada and has a long historic relationship with the NFU and with Lavia Campesina. I'm based in Bangalore, India, but right now I'm in Delhi, and it's pretty cold right now, but it's definitely not as cold as where you guys are. Earlier this year, we released our latest report, Food Barons 2022, which tracks corporate concentration across 11 industrial agri-food related sectors. Most of these are sectors we have tracked for decades. And so we are able to make historical comparisons about how corporate concentration is moving. Next slide, please. Many of the agri-food sectors that we tracked are top-heavy to the extent that they're just controlled by 4 to 6 firms. So for example, as you can also see in the graphic, Syngenta now controls 24.6% of the agrochemical sector. The top 4 companies in the agrochemical sector actually control about 62.3% of the market share. And the top 6 companies in the commercial seed sector control 58% of the market share, with Bayer holding just about 23%. Could I have the next slide, please? So for the purpose of historical comparison, only 2 companies now control 40% of the global commercial seed sector, compared with 10 companies controlling the same proportion of the market 25 years ago. So 4 or less firms controlling 40% control of a market is sometimes regarded as a marker for oligopoly. These companies are controlling where the industrial food system is going, how it feeds people, how it impacts our health and our planet. It's also important to remember that 70% of the population depends on the peasant food web, which is the small-scale producers, livestock keepers, pastoralists, hunters, that actually feeds most of the world. Now, as you saw that my presentation is on the corporate control of the industrial food system, and I wanted to get into what the mechanisms are by which these companies are getting bigger. A restructuring is underway across industrial agriculture related sectors by implementing mega mergers, which has led to this kind of corporate control and leading to unprecedented consolidation in the seed, agrochemical, fertilizer, animal genetics, and farm machinery industries, and also creating bigger players in the processing and retail sectors. Next slide, please. Other ways of furthering concentration are by forming joint ventures, partnerships that strengthen the already dominant positions of large market actors. These help these corporate actors to mutually source materials or share R&D costs. For example, John Deere, the world's leading farm machinery company, has formed alliances with all 6 of the dominant agrochemical seeds companies, as well as other machinery companies, to expand its precision farming platform. Companies also form explicit cartels and sometimes implicit cartels in the fertilizer industry, which is an example which is in the last century gone between, like formal and informal cartels. One of the trends highlighted in our report is how digital technologies are being used to entrench corporate control. They are emerging, like digital technologies are emerging as a powerful new driver of consolidation at every link of the food chain. These are being introduced using the climate crisis as a reason, increasing food productivity, feeding an increasing population, and other such reasons are being used to introduce these new technologies. Most big seeds and agrochemical companies, if not all, have their own digital platform, which they use to collect valuable data on and off farm. Big data can include historical, real-time weather information, crop yields, commodity market information, seeds planted, input prices, fertilizer dosage, soil nutrient levels, and moisture levels, and the data is collected, stored, and then analyzed with the help of algorithms to make automated on-farm decisions. Next slide, please. Yeah. So there's a quote that I read by one of the brand managers of Syngenta, which says that before we sold pesticides, seeds, and fertilizers, but now we're a farm services company. We sell service and technology. Selling individual products, we had hit the ceiling and there was no more room. There's a sort of vertical integration of major input firms and farm management services, which is happening. And these big ag companies are buying companies that provide satellite data, weather prediction, farm management, input recommendation, and so on. So now instead of selling a seed plus herbicide, these firms are selling data-driven input recommendations. So there's this transition from an input-based business model to a service-based business model. The data is taken from drones, sensors, automated machinery, satellites, weather data, and is analyzed by softwares using these apps. Some of these apps are even free to download, but they're used to obtain valuable on-farm data that the companies then leverage to strengthen their power. Next slide, please. One of the most talked about examples is Bayer's FieldView digital platform, for example, which extracts about 87.5 billion data points from 180 million acres, which is about 78.2 million hectares of farmland in 23 countries, and it funnels it into the cloud servers of Microsoft and Amazon. This is called precision agriculture in the industry, and the promise is that these recommendations will lead to lesser use of the agrochemicals. That is highly unlikely because in any case, I don't think the agrochemical firms will sacrifice profitability and whatever little offset they want to do in traditional input sales, if at all, which is highly unlikely, will be compensated by increased sales of other products, which may include tailored or site-specific inputs developed using collected on-farm data. And researchers have reported that Bayer and other firms have admitted that there are no actual overall reduction in pesticides, just a claimed increase in production for the same amount of pesticides. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a little diagram we had made last year, just to show how food and agriculture is getting entangled with big tech actors. Data is the new soil, and that is used to suggest how critical digital information is slowly becoming important in agriculture, and the increasing role of actors that have nothing to do with agriculture, like the firms that have been mentioned here. Example, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft, and so on. Next slide, please. Digitization is also facilitating new kinds of anti-competitive practices across the board. For example, a news investigation into Amazon found that Amazon was ripping off the designs of its sellers and building its own brand using that data. And similar pattern has been found with food delivery platforms, which are using restaurants' data to develop cloud kitchen of their own, effectively becoming competitors of the restaurants on the platforms themselves. Next slide, please. Yeah. The world's largest commodity firms have joined forces to create a new digital platform called Covantis, which was launched, I think, in March 2021. This blockchain aims to digitize global agriculture shipping transactions. And the firms say that this will increase transparency and security, but the concern is that the governance of this blockchain is controlled by the 6 corporate founders like Cargill, ADM, Costco, Viterra, Louis Dreyfus, and others. And legal scholars have mentioned that in highly consolidated markets, which these are, private blockchain technology can be used to engage in anti-competitive practices. Blockchains also become especially worrying as they are coupled with cryptocurrencies and tokens. For example, Nori, which is a North American company that issues carbon credits based on digital farming, is now turning its credit into blockchain-based crypto tokens to be traded. And in a month when we've just seen the collapse of FTX, the idea of moving agriculture on crypto markets should be a concern for us. Next slide, please. One thing that jumped out to us as we researched concentration when we were doing our research for the food barons was how well the big corporations were doing when everyone else was suffering. Indeed, these Very firms posted massive profits during the pandemic, and an obvious example is Cargill, which earned the highest profit in its 164-year history, after which it announced that it won't be making its financial statements public. We know that these companies use the pandemic and inflation and other crises to increase the prices. Last year in 2021, CNN reported that inflation was like a gift to the grocery sector, which marks up the full rate of inflation plus a little bit more. But it's not just the grocery sector, of course. There are many other sectors that have benefited from this situation, sometimes even restricting supplies to keep prices high and going on blaming external circumstances for this. When it comes to food price hike, it's not just the supply chain chaos or inflation. That's not the issue, it's corporate greed. Next slide, please. One last trend that we noticed in our report is the increasing control of asset managers in some leading agribusiness corporations, which is, and when a company owns assets in multiple corporations that are supposed to compete, it's called horizontal shareholding. So in this way, the competition becomes unlikely and might promote anti-competitive practices. This is something that Jennifer Clapp's amazing research has first alerted us to a few years ago. Yeah. In a separate bit of research to the Food Barons report, we ranked the top 100 companies by sales in the global food chain, and we found that about 2/3 of those companies were publicly listed, and a third of those companies had the same three asset managers as some of their largest institutional investors, like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to have such a consolidated industrial food system? We have increasing prices. These companies hold a lot of control. They have deeply social and environmentally damaging practices. Workers' rights are being harmed. Farmers don't get remunerated, and consumers pay extra. What are some of the ways in which we can push back? First is we can support food sovereignty. We have to remember that it is small farmers, fishers, rural women, peasants who feed the world and not the industrial food systems. And we have to recognize this and challenge the narrative of these huge companies that have been portraying themselves as saviors of the food system. In a comic by Bayer, it actually calls itself a superhero while addressing the climate crisis. La Via Campesina sets a very clear path to be able to feed the world and rebuild the planet, which is food sovereignty and agroecology. With our research, we also try to highlight where corporate power lies and where critical divestment and defunding is needed. So campaigns to defund or divest from the industrial food chain by schools, universities, pension funds, local authorities, and other public institutions holding investments in these identified companies should consider withdrawing their funds from specific food barons and from the entire destructive industrial food system. We should support for the implementation of socially and ecologically useful technologies and work on the creation of bottom-up participatory technology assessment. Anti-competition regulators must develop new mechanisms to cope and to address the changing nature of anti-competitive practices, which is facilitated by digitization, and restrict the cross-chain power of data giants. The weaknesses of agribusinesses are being exposed, and it's trying to regain legitimacy amidst the climate crisis, the biodiversity collapse that it itself caused. And this is a moment where to find their structural weaknesses and to take collaborative action strategically. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kavya. I really look forward. I really look forward to hearing and reading further to your report. That was really informative presentation. Thank you, Kavya.